Hey everyone, and welcome back to the deep dive. Tonight we're going to be looking into something super important for anyone out there who walks or cycles or drives, especially after dark. And that is understanding retroreflective materials. That stuff that really makes you stand out at night. And how they can actually play this surprisingly powerful role in keeping pedestrians safe.
Yeah.
And you shared some really interesting research with me about this, including this 2023 study from Human Factors, which I have right here. It's called Road Users Fail to Appreciate the Special Optical Properties of Retroreflective Materials. Like, what a title, huh?
It's a mouthful, yeah, but it gets right to the point.
It does. It does.
And that's exactly what this deep dive is going to be about. Do you truly understand just how much brighter these retroreflective materials can appear at night? Especially, when you've got something like car headlights shining on you. I mean,
Yeah.
It sounds like it should be simple, right?
It does, yeah.
But the research we're going to dig into tonight really reveals this significant gap in our understanding. And it has some real-world consequences for safety.
Wow. Okay.
So our mission tonight is to uncover this gap
Okay, let's do it.
and to figure out what it all means when we're out there on the roads.
All right, let's get into it. So the study kicks off, it's talking about this really concerning trend,
Yeah.
the increasing dangers for pedestrians at night. It's pretty scary stuff.
It really is. And the study pulls out some figures that are, well, stark is the word that they use.
Yeah.
So over the decade, starting in 2009, pedestrian fatalities in the U.S. went up a shocking 53%.
That's a huge increase.
It's a huge jump. And, even more troubling is that pedestrians are making up a larger proportion of all traffic fatalities.
Oh, wow.
So during that same time period, we saw a rise from 12% to 17%. It's a big deal.
It's not just more people are walking, though, right?
Right.
Like, the time of day is also a critical role in all of this.
Absolutely. A critical role.
Yeah.
And the vast majority, a huge 77% in 2020 of these pedestrian deaths happened when it was dark.
Wow.
And that really shines a light on the core problem here, right? Drivers, they just have a really hard time seeing pedestrians at night.
Yeah.
Because you think about it, against that dark background, a person walking, they just become a very low contrast object. Essentially they disappear.
They're just blending into the shadows.
Yeah.
Blend right in.
Which brings us to our hero,
Right.
retroreflectivity. It
Yes.
sounds a little bit technical, but the basic idea is so smart.
It is smart, and it's simple in a way, right? What we're talking about are materials that are designed to reflect light back to where it came from. So right back towards the source.
So it's not bouncing off at an angle like a regular mirror would.
No, not at all. I mean, it's ingenious, really. Think of it this way. These materials, they've got thousands of microscopic structures. And they can either be tiny little glass beads or they can be these minute prisms. And they're all embedded in the surface of the material. So like a bunch of tiny little, I don't know, cat's eyes.
Yeah, like thousands of little cat's eyes all woven into the fabric.
Wow.
But the key is they're all precisely angled to catch that incoming light and then send it right back in a concentrated beam towards the source.
Which would be, in this case, a car's headlights.
Exactly. And that means it goes right into the eyes of the driver.
Oh, that's clever.
That's the whole point.
So the big advantage here is you're massively increasing the contrast, right?
Absolutely.
So you really make those pedestrians stand out.
They do.
So instead of being this dark shape, they become this, bright point of light.
Exactly. And the beauty of it is you can use it in so many different ways. I mean, you can add retroreflective markings as simple accessories, on your clothing, on your bags, or you can even integrate it right into the design of the garments themselves.
Oh, very cool.
It's a very effective tool.
Now, the research also talks about this concept of placing these reflective materials in specific spots. They call it biomotion. What is that all about?
So the idea here is that it's not just about slapping some reflective tape anywhere, right? You want to think about it strategically. And the way they do that is they place these markings on the parts of your body that naturally move when you walk.
Oh, I see. So like your ankles, your knees, your wrists, elbows.
Exactly. Those are the key spots.
Interesting. So it's almost like you're tapping into how our brains are wired to see movement.
You got it.
Huh.
Research, including this 2017 study by Wood and his colleagues, has shown that this kind of placement, it doesn't just make pedestrians more visible, it makes them more conspicuous. So what happens is drivers notice and focus on pedestrians wearing biomotion retroreflectors much faster.
Really?
Yeah, and they also recognize them as people more quickly.
Wow.
And they can even tell which direction they're moving. So it's like you're leveraging our natural sensitivity to these human movement patterns.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You see those moving points of light and your brain instantly knows, hey, there's a person walking.
That's the idea.
So with these clear advantages, you'd think everyone would be wearing retroreflective gear in the dark.
You would think.
But the research paints a different picture.
It does.
What's going on there?
So despite all these benefits, there's evidence that pedestrians often just don't wear these markings.
Really?
Yeah. And in 2012, Phelan and his colleagues did some focus groups, and they revealed this surprising lack of awareness about effective strategies for being seen at night. And cyclists and runners, they were particularly underinformed about retroreflectors. They just didn't realize how important they were in low-light conditions.
Wow. So that brings us to the central question that this 2023 study, the one we're focusing on tonight, tries to answer.
Yeah.
And it's this. Do people who use roads, you and me, do we actually understand and appreciate how retroreflectivity works?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
Do we recognize it when we see it? And more importantly, do we get how the lighting has to be just right for it to really work its magic?
Yeah.
So to find out, King, Szubski, and Tyrrell, they designed these two really cool experiments.
Okay, I want to hear about these experiments. So the first one was lab-based. What did they do?
So they got a bunch of young drivers to come into the lab,
Okay.
and they had them look at different material samples.
Like what kind of materials?
So they had retroreflective material, of course,
Okay.
but they also had diffuse reflective material. You know, that's like your typical colored fabric that kind of scatters the light everywhere.
Right.
And they even threw in a fluorescent swatch.
Interesting.
And the participants had to, say how bright they thought each material was. And they did this both before and after they actually saw a demonstration of how the materials looked under light.
So they were making predictions and then comparing them to reality.
Exactly.
Clever. Now, you mentioned that there were different ways they showed these samples initially, right?
Yes. So before the big reveal, so to speak, they divided the drivers into 3 groups. The first group, the flexible group, they got to actually pick up and handle swatches of the material. And these were mounted on this soft felt.
Oh.
So they could really feel it. The second group, the rigid group, they could also touch the swatches, but these were mounted on like a firm backing.
So a little less flexible.
Yeah, a little less. And then the third group, the wall group, they could only view the swatches from a distance.
So they were just hanging on a wall.
Just hanging on a wall. But then, after this initial look, all the participants got to see all the swatches mounted on a wall.
Okay.
But here's the key. They had this desk lamp set up that was positioned super close to the participants' eyes. So they were creating the small angle between the light source and the person's viewpoint.
Which is crucial for retroreflectivity to really pop.
That's right.
Very cool. Now, what about the second experiment?
All right. So experiment 2, this one moved online.
Oh, okay.
So participants watched short videos of swatches again. This time they had specular swatches, which means like a mirror.
Okay.
Then they had your regular diffuse swatches and, of course, the retroreflective swatches. And in these videos, they were playing around with the entrance angle.
What do you mean by entrance angle?
So think of it like this. You've got your car's headlights, right?
Yeah.
And the entrance angle is basically how directly those headlights are hitting the material.
Oh, okay.
So they tested a couple of different angles. They had a 2-degree angle, which is almost like head-on. Then they had a 23-degree angle and a 45-degree angle, which is more like off to the side.
Okay.
And of course, they had some checks in place to make sure everyone understood what they were seeing in these videos.
To make sure everyone was on the same page.
Exactly.
Okay, so 2 very different approaches, but tackling the same question.
Right. Do we get retroreflectivity?
Yeah. Do we? What did they find?
Well, what's really fascinating is the findings were very consistent across both of the experiments. And there was this really clear pattern that emerged. So the most striking result was this. People consistently underestimated how bright the retroreflective materials would be. Especially, when the light source was close to their line of sight.
Really?
Yeah. And this underestimation was particularly strong in that first experiment. Remember where they hadn't seen the materials close up beforehand?
Right, David.
So the big takeaway here is that our instincts about what's going to be visible at night are often wrong. And it's not just wrong, it can be dangerous because we underestimate the power of this retroreflection.
Wow, so we're not expecting it to be as bright as it really is.
Exactly. We're not giving it enough credit.
So what about the other types of materials? What happened there?
Well, that's the other side of the coin. People tended to overestimate how bright the diffuse and fluorescent materials would be in those same nighttime conditions.
So they thought they were going to be more visible than they actually were.
Yeah, they were expecting more from them.
Huh. So it's almost like we've got it backwards.
It's a bit backwards, yeah.
That's concerning. Now, did that hands-on experience in the first experiment make any difference in those perceptions?
It did, a little bit. So the people who got to actually handle the retroreflective swatches, the flexible and rigid groups, they made slightly higher predictions about how bright they would be.
Compared to the wall group.
Exactly.
So it seems like getting up close and personal with the material gave them a little bit more insight.
It did. However, even those groups still underestimated the brightness.
Wow. So even with that hands-on experience, they were still surprised by how bright it actually was.
It's a powerful effect.
So what about the fluorescent material? You mentioned earlier that the researchers had a theory about why people might be overestimating how well that works at night.
Yeah, they think it might have to do with our associations with fluorescent colors. We tend to associate those bright, almost glowing colors with high visibility during the daytime.
Right, like those safety vests construction workers wear.
Exactly. And so it seems like there might be this misunderstanding that this daytime brightness carries over to nighttime.
Which isn't the case at all.
Not at all.
So people might be relying on these bright colors thinking they're super visible, but in reality, they're not really doing the job.
That's the concern.
What about the specular reflection? The mirror-like material from that online experiment. What happened there?
So in experiment 2, the participants, they kind of understood how that specular reflection worked, but only when the entrance angle was really small. So they got that the mirror would reflect the light back toward the camera in the video.
Right.
But when they increased that angle, the participants started to overestimate the brightness.
Even when the mirror wasn't facing the light source directly?
Even then. And that's because, specular reflection, it's like a mirror. The light bounces off at an equal and opposite angle.
Right.
So unless you're in that perfect spot to catch the reflection, you're not going to see it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, how did the retroreflective material perform in that second experiment when they were changing the light angle?
That's where it gets interesting. The brightness readings for the retroreflective swatches actually went up as the entrance angle got larger.
Really?
Yeah. So people were actually surprised by how well it continued to work even when it wasn't facing the light directly.
Wow, so it's pretty robust.
Very robust.
So we've seen that there's this clear lack of understanding about how retroreflectivity works and how effective it can be. And at the same time, we're overestimating the visibility of those other materials. So what does all this mean in the real world? Why should we care about this gap in understanding?
It all comes down to safety. If people don't realize how much these retroreflective markings can improve their visibility, they're less likely to use them.
Right.
And that's a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah.
We could be doing so much more to keep pedestrians and cyclists safe, but this lack of awareness is holding us back.
It's like we're missing out on this simple but effective tool.
Exactly. And if you don't know how much brighter you're going to appear to drivers, why bother putting on that extra gear, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
This research is a real wake-up call. We need to educate people.
Yeah.
We need to make sure everyone understands the unique properties of these materials and the real impact they can have on visibility at night.
So, the takeaway here is clear. We need to realize just how effective retroreflective materials are in the dark.
Absolutely. And if we can spread that message, we can save lives. I mean, every single listener here is either a pedestrian, a cyclist, a driver, or they share the road with people who are.
It affects all of us.
It does.
And it really makes you think about all the things around us that use retroreflection, like those road signs that practically jump out at you when your headlights hit them, or those reflectors on vehicles, or even the strips on emergency workers' uniforms.
It's a world of difference.
It is. And speaking of making a difference, this deep dive into retroreflectivity has been brought to you by Reflectos, a high-quality brand that's dedicated to making reflective gear for pedestrians and cyclists. What I really like about Reflectos is they use generous amounts of high-performance reflective material, and they place it strategically on their products to maximize visibility.
So you know you're going to be seen.
Exactly. They're helping you stay safe and seen out there on the road after dark.
Great stuff.
All right, folks, until next time, stay safe and keep reflecting.
Keep reflecting.